A thumb taps the glowing glass of a smartphone. The screen explodes with green confetti and a cheerful notification. You are now an owner. But look at the evidence. We pull the official corporate ledger, the raw paper trail beneath the user interface. My red marker crosses out your name. Instead, I circle a single, stamped entity. Cede and Company. This unknown partnership legally owns 83% of all publicly traded shares in the United States. Your trading app is lying to you. You are participating in a legally engineered simulation. If a black swan event hits the market tomorrow and your broker liquidates, the legal title to your life savings does not belong to you. It belongs to a shadow partnership operating out of Manhattan. Ignorance of the absolute legal distinction between a beneficial interest and true legal ownership is the ultimate systemic blind spot. You do not hold equity. You hold a derivative claim. You hold an IOU from an IOU. I'm going to strip away the slick user interface of modern capitalism and follow the raw data trail down to the foundation. We're going to reconstruct the architecture of this hidden monopoly, exposing the mechanical truth behind the paper illusion of modern wealth. Together, we will audit the transaction logs and reveal the single systemic choke point where all American financial power actually resides. This is a forensic reconstruction of the perfect heist. Welcome to the cold room. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead. On this brushed metal table sits the evidence. A single, physical stock certificate from 1929. Heavy paper, ornate ink, bearing a real human signature. Right next to it lies a modern smartphone, displaying a digital account balance of $54 trillion. To a forensic financial auditor, this contrast is not just technological progress. It is the visual gap between physical reality and pure digital abstraction. The investigation begins with the terminology in your user agreement. When you press Buy today, you assume you are purchasing a fragment of a corporation. But the protocols say otherwise. According to the Securities and Exchange Commission, you are merely purchasing what they define as a beneficial interest, not the actual underlying security. The money leaves your bank account, but the asset itself never actually reaches your hands. It is intercepted at the protocol level. We dig deeper into the corporate archives. If you subpoena the issuer's official shareholder register, the definitive legal ledger of who owns the company, your name does not appear anywhere on it. You are entirely erased from the official record. Instead, what you find is your broker's name listed on a secondary internal ledger. To the corporation you invested in, you simply do not exist as an owner. You are an invisible beneficiary, a statistical ghost haunting the broker's database. But the paper trail does not stop at your broker. The auditor's instinct says keep following the custody chain. When we audit the brokerages themselves, we find another anomaly. Even your broker does not hold the legal title to those shares. They are operating under the same illusion. They hold their clients' assets through an entirely separate, centralized entity known as the Depository Trust Company. The custody of your wealth has been outsourced again, pushed further into the shadows. Think of your broker not as a vault, but as a mirror. They reflect a balance back to you, a digital promise that the assets exist somewhere in the financial ether. But an auditor knows that a reflection cannot be liquidated in a crisis. The broker's database is merely a subledger, a local copy of a much larger, synchronized master file. They are entirely dependent on the custody protocols of the Depository Trust Company to validate that the shares they sold you actually exist. At the absolute top of this custodial hierarchy, we hit the bottleneck. Above the retail investor, above the brokerage, and above the depository trust company itself, the legal trail terminates at a single entity, Cede and Company. They are a specialized nominee partnership, an administrative shell acting entirely on behalf of the depository. Every transaction, every dividend, every fractional share ultimately traces its legal lineage back to this one highly centralized corporate ghost. The scale of this consolidation is staggering. We are not looking at a clerical error. We are looking at a systemic monopoly. As of early 2024, the ledgers show that Cede and Company holds legal title to roughly $54 trillion in assets. Let that number register in your mind. That encompasses 83% of all United States equities. One private partnership holds the legal deed to the vast majority of the American corporate landscape. Through the lens of a financial investigator, this reveals a terrifying legal architecture. The industry calls this the street name system, a polite term for collective custody. Unless you explicitly demand direct registration, a complex, archaic process that actually places your name back on the corporate ledger, you are trapped in the street name matrix. Your property rights are purely derivative, mathematically bound to a master database that you can never access or audit yourself. In financial forensics, we look for the motive, the method, and the beneficiary. We track the flow of capital to find the crime. But here, the evidence presents a paradox. Trillions of dollars of property rights have been systematically detached from the people who paid for them. The wealth of an entire nation has been centralized into a single depository vault in New York. Yet, there are no alarms ringing at the Securities and Exchange Commission. There are no secret indictments. This architecture is designed to generate an illusion of infinite liquidity. When millions of users simultaneously buy and sell on their screens, they believe physical property is changing hands. But an investigator reviewing the server logs sees a different reality. The underlying asset never moves. Only the database entries shift. Wall Street built a sealed ecosystem where the legal title remains permanently frozen in place, while the derivative claims circulate at the speed of light. We have laid out the corpse on the autopsy table. The victim is the very concept of your absolute property rights. We have identified the prime suspect holding the smoking gun, Cede and Company. They possess the legal title to your assets, your retirement, your investments. The paper trail is undeniable, and the math is exact. The ultimate transfer of wealth has already occurred right in front of us, disguised as a necessary software update to the global financial system. But this is the anomaly that keeps the investigator awake at night. We have the victim, and we have the suspect. But there is no apparent crime. Every single step of this massive dispossession, every transfer of legal title, is perfectly, flawlessly legal. Wall Street didn't steal your ownership in the dead of night. You signed it away in the terms of service. The question isn't how they broke the law. The question is why they had to rewrite the laws of ownership in the first place. To understand why the laws of ownership were rewritten, I had to trace the origin of that $54 trillion anomaly. How does the wealth of an empire end up in one pair of hands? The answer is not found in a modern server room, but in a crime scene buried under half a century of dust. I found the exact moment the physical machinery of American capitalism choked to death on its own success. The archives from 1968 show a financial district bordering on absolute anarchy. Slow the footage down. Look past the sharp suits and the mid-century glamour. You see messengers sprinting through gridlocked traffic, physically dragging canvas duffel bags stuffed with paper certificates. This is the analog reality of wealth. If you wanted to trade, a piece of paper had to move from point A to point B. But human muscle has a strict mathematical limit. By the late 1960s, the post-war economic boom collided violently with analog logistics. Trading volume suddenly surged past 15 million shares a single day. The back-office infrastructure of Wall Street, relying on typewriters, pneumatic tubes, and exhausted clerks, simply shattered under the sheer physical weight of the transaction data. Through my lens as an investigator examining this historical crime scene, the evidence of systemic failure is everywhere. Trading desks were completely buried under literal mountains of unfiled paper. Clerks were working 70-hour weeks, sleeping on the floors of bank vaults, desperately trying to reconcile ledgers by hand. The paper trail wasn't just cold. I saw a system buried in an avalanche of unchecked receipts. This logistical nightmare birthed a terrifying financial anomaly known as the fail to deliver. A transaction would execute on the exchange floor, money would technically change hands, but the physical stock certificate never arrived at its destination. By 1968, the backlog of these missing assets surpassed a staggering $4 billion. The market was trading ghosts, and the foundation was cracking. $4 billion in 1968 was enough to trigger a sovereign debt crisis. Brokers could not prove who owned what. The basic mechanism of capitalism, the absolute certainty of property transfer, was completely paralyzed by bureaucratic friction. An investigator looking at these logs sees a system running purely on blind faith, waiting for a single shock to bring the entire interconnected structure down. The crisis reached such a critical mass that the central authorities had to pull the emergency brake. In a desperate, unprecedented move, the New York Stock Exchange was forced to close completely every single Wednesday. The beating heart of global finance stopped for 24 hours a week, strictly to allow bruised and sleep-deprived clerks to crawl through the backlog of paperwork. They called it the paper crunch. But a paralyzed system attracts scavengers. The sheer volume of untracked wealth sitting in unlocked filing cabinets and carried in canvas bags caught the attention of organized crime. Syndicate operatives realized that Wall Street had lost track of its own inventory. Millions of dollars in physical, untraceable bearer bonds and stock certificates were quietly bled from the system, vanishing into the lower Manhattan underworld. This wasn't a sophisticated cyber heist. It was a smash-and-grab operation exploiting pure administrative chaos. When I review the police reports from the era, the sheer negligence is staggering. Messengers were mugged in broad daylight, and corrupt clerks simply walked out the front door with fortunes stuffed inside their coats. The paper trail was actively being destroyed by the very people hired to maintain it. The evidence points to an inescapable conclusion. The United States financial markets were on the absolute brink of total, unrecoverable collapse. This was not a minor recession. It was an existential threat to the mechanics of global trade. If the physical movement of paper could not be halted, the exchanges would simply cease to function. The architecture of wealth required an immediate, brutal intervention to survive. This is the exact moment the motive crystallizes. The elites of Wall Street faced a binary choice. Either scale back the massive profitability of the trading floors to match human limitations, or radically engineer a new legal paradigm. They chose the latter. They realized that the physical possession of property was no longer a fundamental right. It was a deadly logistical liability that had to be eliminated at all costs. You cannot solve a paper crisis by printing more paper, and you cannot hire enough messengers to outpace the velocity of modern greed. The investigation shows that the architects of the market needed to kill the physical transfer of assets permanently. They needed a mechanism to freeze the legal title in place forever, while allowing the abstract value to circulate freely. They needed to invent a ghost to hold the ledger. The paper crunch of 1968 provided the perfect alibi for the greatest legal pivot in financial history. The chaos on the streets justified the creation of a shadow monopoly. Wall Street was about to lock the wealth of the world in a subterranean vault, stripping you of your name on the deed, all under the guise of saving the system from itself. The era of true ownership was ending, and the proxy era was about to begin. Following the desperate Wednesday market closures and the imminent threat of systemic collapse we established in 1968, Wall Street needed a radical, unprecedented intervention. The system was bleeding out, and applying a bandage to the logistics of paper delivery was no longer a viable survival strategy. We needed to amputate the very concept of physical exchange. Step inside this massive, dimly lit subterranean vault. Listen to the echo as a heavy steel door slams shut, sealing away the outside world. Row upon row of metal filing cabinets stretch out into the cold darkness. This is the scene of the crime. Though you will find no blood here, the weapon they used to solve the paper crisis was not a faster messenger. It was a strategy to stop delivery entirely, creating a ghost to hold the keys. To the forensic auditor reviewing the archives, the trail goes completely cold in 1973. This is the year the Depository Trust Company was established. Their mandate was not to optimize the flow of wealth, but to execute a chillingly clinical protocol known in the financial documentation as immobilization. The objective was absolute physical stasis. The blueprints for immobilization were brutal, but flawlessly effective. The architects of this new system realized that if property moves, it can be lost, stolen, or delayed. So they initiated a massive sweep. They gathered every physical stock certificate they could find, locked them inside this central, impenetrable vault, and mandated that they must never see the light of day again. But locking paper in a bunker creates a massive legal paradox. If millions of different people own these certificates, how do you legally process corporate actions, dividends, and voting rights without constantly retrieving the physical documents? You cannot. The paper trail demands a single point of contact. To achieve this legally, the ownership had to be universally consolidated. I found the solution buried in the incorporation documents. All of those locked-away certificates had to be legally re-registered under one single, unified name. That name, forged in the bureaucratic shadows of Lower Manhattan, became Cede and Company. The moniker itself is a sanitized abbreviation derived simply from Certificate Depository. A corporate phantom was born. Cede and Company has no independent will, no active employees, and no corporate strategy. It is purely a nominee partnership, an empty vessel engineered specifically to act as the legal owner of record for the Depository Trust Company. It is the perfect suspect. A legal entity that holds everything, but does absolutely nothing, existing only as a signature on a master ledger. Once the assets were successfully immobilized under this new proxy, the mechanics of Wall Street were fundamentally altered. Trading no longer required the dangerous physical movement of paper across town. When a transaction occurred, nothing actually moved inside the vault. The process simply required updating electronic ledgers at the central depository. From the perspective of an investigator tracking the capital flow, this was a masterpiece of misdirection. The market appeared to accelerate to blinding speeds, trading millions of shares in milliseconds. But the physical reality was complete paralysis. The actual, tangible wealth of the American economy was sitting quietly in the dark, chained to a single legal entity. This operational sleight of hand birthed what the legal protocols call the street name system. Under this architecture, Cede and Company became the permanent legal owner of record. When you look at the master shareholder list of any major corporation, you will not see the names of the people who paid for the stock. You will only see the ghost. So, where does that leave you, the investor? I trace the legal definitions, and the truth is cold. Under the street name system, brokers and retail investors are mathematically reduced to mere entries in a database. You no longer possess actual property. You hold a derivative claim on a derivative claim. Your financial independence is fundamentally tethered to their ledger. You traded your absolute property rights for the convenience of instant liquidity. The interface on your brokerage app shows you a neat, comforting balance, but that interface is a psychological buffer. It hides the terrifying reality that your wealth only exists as a secondary accounting entry, permitted by the grace of the master depository. Every single trade you make is essentially a request for permission to update a spreadsheet that you do not control. The chain of custody is unbroken, and it always leads back to this subterranean vault. The perfect crime was convincing the entire world to voluntarily hand over their legal titles in exchange for the illusion of speed and efficiency. By solving the physical crisis of 1968, the architects of this system created an invisible, systemic choke point. We replaced the chaos of messengers and stolen duffel bags with a singular, centralized point of failure. The entire foundation of Western capitalism now rests precariously on the operational integrity of one isolated database. The physical paper is dead, immobilized forever in the dark. But the ghost that replaced it, Cede and Company, has grown into a digital leviathan. To truly understand the scale of what you are trapped inside, we have to follow the wires out of this vault. We must examine the mathematical engine that powers this illusion, and the sheer, terrifying velocity at which it operates. With the physical paper locked away forever, I follow the wires out of that subterranean vault, tracing the paper trail as it metamorphoses into a digital leviathan. We step into the glowing, sterile interior of a modern data center. The air here is chilled to exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Miles of fiber optic cables pulse with cold light, feeding the machinery that took the place of those sweating messengers. This is the lair of the beast. Through the eyes of the system's architect maintaining this bunker, the flashing racks are not just hardware, they are the arteries of American capitalism. We found the ghost entity, Cede and Company, but a ghost needs a host to interact with the physical world. Now we must analyze the machine that actually processes the wealth of the globe. The terminal screen before the architect displays lines of code executing trades faster than human cognition. You are looking at the central nervous system of the financial world. Today, an organization known as the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, or DTCC, operates the physical and digital infrastructure behind the Cede and Company ledger. They are the architects of the database where your derivative property rights live and die. If Cede is the legal owner on paper, the DTCC is the relentless engine moving the numbers. I comb through the operating protocols of this data center looking for the transaction logic. To the uninitiated, a stock trade seems like a direct handshake between a buyer and a seller. You tap a button, the money leaves your account, and the shares arrive. But the evidence in these server logs tells a completely different story. The handshake is a carefully engineered lie designed to mask a massive, centralized intervention. The audit trail reveals that the DTCC does not simply store records or passively witness your transactions. It acts as the central counterparty to almost every single trade executed in the United States market. The moment your order hits the exchange, this Leviathan steps between you and the seller. It becomes the buyer to every seller and the seller to every buyer, legally guaranteeing the settlement between the massive brokerages. By inserting itself into the middle of every transaction, the clearinghouse effectively socializes the risk of Wall Street. The system's architect monitors the data flow, watching billions of dollars in obligations bounce between servers. If a major broker defaults mid-trade, this centralized protocol ensures the market does not collapse in a domino effect. But this safety net requires an operational processing speed that borders on the impossible. To handle this unprecedented volume, the DTCC deploys a highly specialized protocol. It utilizes an algorithm known as continuous net settlement. Instead of settling millions of individual chaotic trades one by one, which would overwhelm even these servers, the system collapses the data. It calculates a single, unified net obligation for each broker at the very end of the trading day. The chaos of millions of choices is reduced to a single mathematical truth. Through the terminal screen, the true nature of continuous net settlement becomes terrifyingly clear. It is a relentless mathematical engine neutralizing trillions of dollars of debt in milliseconds. If a broker buys 10 million shares of a stock for clients, but sells 9 million shares of that same stock, the algorithm simply nets it out. Only 1 million shares actually move on the master ledger. The rest is just negated data, wiped from existence. You are witnessing the operation of the most powerful financial engine on Earth. The sheer volume of wealth pulsing through these fiber optic cables defies human comprehension. The transaction logs from the archive show a staggering figure. In the year 2023 alone, the DTCC processed securities transactions valued at over $2.4 quadrillion, a number so large it breaks standard economic models. To put that impossible metric into forensic perspective, $2.4 quadrillion is roughly 23 times the entire global gross domestic product. The combined economic output of every nation on the planet multiplied by 23 is all flowing through this single proprietary network. The system's architect carries the psychological weight of knowing that a prolonged server crash here would halt the global economy within hours. I trace the blinking lights on the server racks, following the flow of those quadrillions. Every blink is a mortgage paid, a retirement fund shifted, an inheritance liquidated. And yet, none of the physical assets actually move. They remain locked in the dark vault we left behind. This room merely processes the derivative mathematics of those frozen assets. It is a factory of illusions, producing nothing but perfect, continuous balance. The deeper I dig into the settlement code, the more obvious the trap becomes. You look at your phone, trusting the green numbers on your screen, entirely unaware of the absolute bottleneck your wealth must pass through. This sterile room dictates the reality of your portfolio. The continuous net settlement algorithm does not care about your personal investment strategy. It only cares about zeroing out the institutional debt at the end of the day. But no algorithm is flawless, especially one processing 23 times the global economic output. The system's architect knows that abstracting physical reality into pure mathematics always creates an exploitable shadow. We have found the machine, and we have quantified its impossible speed. Now, I need to look for the anomalies in the code. Because when a system this massive loses track of a single ghost, the consequences are catastrophic. The $2.4 quadrillion machine seems flawless. From the outside, the continuous net settlement algorithm hums with terrifying perfection. But as an auditor, I know that abstracting physical reality into pure mathematics always leaves a critical exploit. We're looking at a macro shot of a hard drive spinning inside the clearinghouse. Suddenly, the pristine rhythm breaks. A harsh electronic screech echoes. The screen tears, bleeding rows of brutal red text. That red text reads, "Fail to deliver." The clean, frictionless math of global finance is abruptly corrupted. This is the anomaly we have been hunting. When Wall Street immobilized the physical certificates and created billions of digital ghosts, they introduced a fatal delay. What happens when the master database loses track of the exact ghosts it created? The answer is chilling. It accidentally clones them, birthing a glitch in the matrix of modern wealth. I pulled the forensic logs to trace this corruption. Because trading occurs electronically on your screen without the immediate transfer of the underlying legal title, a temporal gap exists. There is a rigid delay in the settlement cycle. During this brief, opaque window between the moment you tap buy and the moment the ledger officially clears the transaction, a critical anomaly is born. The industry calls it a fail to deliver, and it is the shadow currency of Wall Street. To the forensic auditor, a timeline is a crime scene. In a physical market, if you sell a car, you hand over the keys immediately. But in the architecture of Cede and Company, the transaction speed outpaces the settlement reality. You are trading promises of ghosts. When millions of these digital promises collide in the settlement engine, the system sometimes chokes. A bottleneck forms in the dark fiber beneath Lower Manhattan, entirely hidden from the retail interface. Let us examine the exact anatomy of this failure. A fail to deliver happens when a seller executes a legally binding trade on the open market, but deliberately or accidentally fails to actually produce the underlying shares by the required settlement date. The buyer's account registers a positive balance, a green number, on their smartphone, while the seller's side remains mathematically empty. The clearinghouse is now holding a toxic equation that does not balance to zero. Staring at the cascading red errors on the terminal, the sheer scale of the vulnerability becomes apparent. This is not a rare coding error. It is a structural byproduct of the street name system itself. By severing the economic benefit from the legal title, the depository created a loophole of plausible deniability. The seller can claim the shares are coming, lost in the bureaucratic friction, while the buyer trades an asset that technically does not exist yet. In a financial ecosystem where everything is already an electronic derivative, this settlement delay gets weaponized. It allows for a predatory practice known as naked short selling. A trader sells shares into the market that they have not borrowed, do not own, and fundamentally do not mathematically exist anywhere in the vault. They are counterfeiting equity in broad daylight, using the latency of the settlement database as a legal shield to flood the market with fake supply. The auditor sees the motive clearly within the ledger data. By artificially inflating the supply of a specific stock with these phantom shares, a predatory fund can violently drive down the price of the target company. They are creating a digital avalanche to bury a victim, profiting massively from the artificial collapse. The target is suffocated by an infinite supply of fake equity, sold by entities who simply fail to deliver the assets when the bill comes due. If left unchecked by the regulators, this systemic glitch actively creates phantom shares within the broader market. This unseen inflation dilutes the true value of the actual company and silently robs the legitimate shareholders. Yet, because the central database of Cede and Company is a proprietary closed loop, the evidence is entirely hidden within opaque ledgers. The retail investor watches their wealth evaporate, oblivious to the counterfeit shares diluting their property. The math reveals a terrifying reality. The modern stock market operates on a localized system of legalized counterfeiting. If this scale of institutional vulnerability blows your mind, hit the like button right now. Do you think the average retail investor ever stood a chance against a machine that can mathematically clone fake shares? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and to make sure you do not miss the solution to this mystery, subscribe to the channel. After acknowledging the sheer audacity of this exploit, I return to the red warning lights of the server rack. The fail to deliver is a cancer inside the continuous net settlement algorithm. Every phantom share is an unresolved debt, a structural crack in the foundation of the $2.4 quadrillion machine. The central clearinghouse is forced to warehouse these failures, piling up digital obligations in a desperate attempt to keep daily market liquidity flowing smoothly. To the forensic auditor, this is the definition of a ticking time bomb. You cannot infinitely abstract reality. Eventually, the bill for millions of phantom shares must be paid. If a targeted company does not go bankrupt, if it suddenly surges in value, the naked short sellers are caught in a trap of their own making. They must buy back the ghosts they created at an exorbitant premium, risking a chain reaction of defaults that could tear the settlement engine apart. The spinning hard drive screeches again. The architecture of Cede and Company relies on the assumption that retail investors will never demand actual, physical accountability for their assets. It assumes the crowd will remain ignorant of the ghosts in the machine. But what happens when the digital biomass realizes the game is rigged and decides to test the mathematical limits of the vault? The ledgers are about to face a stress test they were never programmed to survive. The ledgers are about to face a stress test they were never programmed to survive. The theoretical risk of phantom shares and settlement delays we just uncovered became violently real. Through the eyes of the system's architect, the sterile 68-degree environment of the data center suddenly feels suffocating. The servers are processing a volume of commands that defies the standard predictive models. A digital bank run is materializing in real time across the monitors. Frantic internet forum posts scroll rapidly across auxiliary screens, overlaying the plunging, erratic stock charts. Red warning lights begin to pulse in the server aisles. The architect watches the telemetry data spike into the danger zone. This is not a drill, and it is not a routine glitch. The mathematical limits of the vault are being tested by an unprecedented anomaly, an attack vector coming entirely from the outside. In January 2021, a swarm of retail investors accidentally found the weak point in the armored architecture of Wall Street. They did not use complex derivatives or insider knowledge. They simply coordinated a massive, localized buying wave that the algorithms could not anticipate. But when you threaten the foundation of a $2.4 quadrillion machine, the machine does not just crash. It mathematically fights back. During the GameStop short squeeze, this extreme volatility threatened the very core of the settlement algorithms. The architect stares at the continuous net settlement dashboard. The system is choking. The fails to deliver are piling up exponentially, creating a cascade of unresolved debt that threatens to break the clearing process. The sheer volume of incoming trades is overwhelming the ledger's capacity to verify and balance the accounts. Alarm bells ring continuously on the trading floors of major brokerages. But here, in the data center, the panic is silent and purely forensic. The central counterparty is suddenly exposed to a fatal risk. If a massive retail brokerage defaults on these trades, the contagion will spread instantly. The investigator's lens reveals a brutal truth. The system is designed to absorb normal market shocks, not a coordinated siege by millions of accounts. To prevent total systemic failure, the core architecture executes a predefined defense protocol. The Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, acting to protect itself from these potential broker defaults, triggers a massive automated margin call. In the dead of night, hours before the market officially opens, the machine issues an ultimatum. They demand billions of dollars in collateral from retail brokerages immediately. This demand for billions of dollars is not a negotiation. It is a mathematical mandate issued by the only entity that holds the master ledger. The architect watches the automated commands execute, fully aware of the devastation they will cause on the other end of the fiber optic lines. The brokerages are caught completely off guard. Their internal risk models never calculated a scenario where the central clearinghouse would require such an exorbitant deposit. Unable to meet these sudden, massive capital requirements, the brokers are backed into a corner. They face an impossible choice: default on their obligations to the clearinghouse and face immediate liquidation, or sever their own clients' access to the market. They choose survival. Within minutes, multiple major retail brokerages are forced to restrict their users from buying the targeted stock, artificially and instantly collapsing the retail demand. You look at your smartphone trading app. The buy button is grayed out or entirely removed. The interface gives you a generic error message, claiming technical difficulties or market volatility. But the architect sees the raw data flow. This is not a technical glitch. It is a forced quarantine. The retail investor is locked out of the market, not by chance, but by a deliberate, systemic intervention designed to save the clearinghouse from a catastrophic default. This unprecedented event exposed the brutal underlying hierarchy of the United States financial system. The illusion of a free and open market evaporates in milliseconds when the core infrastructure is threatened. The survival of the central clearinghouse is mathematically prioritized over the trading rights of the end user. You are a passenger on a ship, and when the hull is breached, your access to the lifeboats is the first thing to be sacrificed. The forensic trail is crystal clear. The investigator reviews the transaction logs from that morning. There was no conspiracy hatched in a smoky back room. There was only the cold, hard logic of the settlement engine executing its survival code. The system protected Cede and Company at the direct expense of the retail public. The master ledger must balance, even if it means freezing millions of accounts and destroying billions in retail wealth. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that your access to the open market is entirely conditional. It is completely dependent on your broker's credit line with the obscure entity holding the master ledger. If your broker cannot post the required collateral, your perceived property rights are instantly suspended. The digital confetti on your screen means absolutely nothing if the clearinghouse decides to pull the plug on the data feed. The architect watches the warning lights slowly shift from red back to a steady, calm green. The automated margin call worked. The artificial collapse in demand allowed the clearing algorithms to catch up, process the fails to deliver, and stabilize the system. The $2.4 quadrillion machine survived the stress test, but it left a trail of undeniable evidence in its wake. The curtain was briefly pulled back. For a few chaotic days in January 2021, the retail public saw the bars of their digital cage. They realized that their ability to buy and sell is a privilege granted by a hidden monopoly, not an unalienable right. The forensic audit of this anomaly confirms our darkest suspicion. You do not own the market. You are merely allowed to participate in it, so long as your participation does not threaten the architecture of the vault. But the architects of this system know that the GameStop anomaly was just a crude, uncoordinated stress test. The real danger is not a mob of retail traders armed with smartphones. By centralizing the ownership of the entire American economy into a single digital ledger, Wall Street has created the most lucrative target in human history. The machine survived a panic, but now we must ask if it can survive a targeted, weaponized digital strike. The machine survived a panic, but as I watched the system's architect in this subterranean cybersecurity war room, a different kind of terror takes hold. The volatility of 2021 forced Wall Street to speed up the clearance engine, but in digital architecture, speed drastically increases vulnerability. He stares at a massive, illuminated global map, watching red arcs of incoming distributed denial-of-service attacks striking the servers in real time. This continuous, silent barrage is not about stealing money. You cannot easily extract billions from a closed-loop settlement engine. The true motive is far more devastating. It is a siege on data integrity itself. By legally engineering a system where all the wealth of an empire is locked into a single digital fortress, Wall Street inadvertently invited the ultimate existential threat. The architect is not guarding cash. He is guarding the fundamental memory of ownership. To mitigate the exact kind of margin crisis we witnessed earlier, the system demanded an upgrade. In May 2024, the United States market transitioned to a T+1 settlement cycle. Every equity trade must now clear and settle in a single business day. The objective was to drain risk from the market by reducing the time your capital hangs in limbo. But solving one mathematical anomaly inevitably birthed a much darker, systemic operational hazard. This new hyper-accelerated timeline brutally compresses the window for error correction. When you have exactly one business day to balance $2.4 quadrillion in annualized transaction volume, human oversight is entirely eliminated. The architect watches the automated defenses parry millions of probing attacks a second. The system is operating at the absolute razor edge of its capacity. A single unpatched vulnerability is no longer a localized glitch. It is a fatal wound. By demanding instant liquidity, we completely traded away margin risk for concentrated operational risk. The centralized database containing the Cede and Company ledger is no longer just an administrative bottleneck. It has mutated into the single point of failure for the entire Western economy. You are looking at a digital Achilles heel. If this specific cluster of servers goes dark, the entire concept of the American stock market ceases to exist in an absolute instant. The architect leans closer to the terminal, monitoring the origin points of the red arcs. These are not amateur hackers looking for a quick payout. The forensic footprint points directly to state-sponsored actors and advanced persistent threat groups. They understand the fundamental vulnerability of the street name system better than the retail investor does. They know that if you want to cripple the United States, you do not bomb its factories. You blind its central ledger. The ultimate nightmare scenario scrolling across the architect's threat matrix is a synchronized, state-sponsored cyber offensive or a sudden quantum decryption event. A strike of that magnitude, bypassing the outer firewalls, would not just siphon funds into hidden offshore accounts. The objective is total systemic amnesia. An attack successful enough to breach the core database would permanently erase the memory of exactly who owns what across the global financial spectrum. Consider the evidentiary trail we have built so far. You do not hold a physical certificate. Your broker only holds a derivative claim. The absolute truth of your property rights exists only as a magnetic charge on this specific array of hard drives. If a malicious code payload successfully scrambles the ownership hash, there is no paper backup to consult. The ledger cannot be reconstructed from secondary sources because those sources mathematically depend on the master file. If this master ledger is irrevocably corrupted, the legal title to 83% of all American corporations dissolves directly into mathematical noise. Every retirement account, every pension fund, every institutional portfolio would instantly become an unresolvable cryptographic puzzle. The database that holds $54 trillion in assets would simply forget its own architecture. Without the central ledger, there are no legal owners. There is only a void. The immediate consequence of such an event is an unresolvable systemic collapse. Trading would halt globally within milliseconds, but unlike the paper crisis of 1968, a Wednesday closure would not fix it. You cannot send clerks to sort through filing cabinets when the files themselves have been mathematically shattered. The legal foundation of modern capitalism would be paralyzed indefinitely, waiting for an ownership verdict that a corrupted machine can never render. To prevent this apocalyptic scenario, the security protocols defending the depository are highly classified, rivaling those of the nuclear arsenal. The architect types a command sequence, isolating a targeted subnet. We are tracking a defense grid that relies on highly segregated, air-gapped networks. The core processing engines are completely severed from the public internet, accessible only through heavily monitored, physical hardware bridges requiring biometric authorization. But even an air-gapped network is theoretically vulnerable to insider threats or zero-day exploits. Therefore, the ultimate failsafe relies on continuous, redundant backups stored in deep physical bunkers spread across undisclosed geographic locations. The data stream is perpetually mirrored, encrypting the status of the $54 trillion ledger and transmitting it underground. The architect's entire existence is dedicated to ensuring these asynchronous backups remain untainted. From my perspective as an investigator, this war room is the ultimate crime scene in waiting. We are observing a daily, invisible conflict for the survival of the global economy. Every red arc on that screen is a bullet aimed directly at the illusion of your financial security. Wall Street effectively placed all the assets of the American empire into a single, highly fortified digital basket. And now, they must spend every waking second defending it from an army of invisible predators. The supreme irony of the system is inescapable. In 1968, the financial market almost collapsed because it was too heavily anchored in the physical world of paper and vaults. Today, it faces an even greater existential threat precisely because it has completely abandoned the physical world. By abstracting ownership into pure data to achieve infinite trading velocity, they engineered a vulnerability that could theoretically wipe out a century of wealth accumulation overnight. The architect watches the current wave of denial-of-service attacks subside, the red arcs fading from the massive map. The ledger is secure for another hour. The machine continues to process the T+1 settlement, and your portfolio remains nominally intact. But the tension in this bunker never truly dissipates. The evidence proves that the entire architecture of modern capital is balancing on the edge of a digital knife. We have found the vault, and we know exactly how fragile it is. We leave the bunker and the invisible war of the digital knife, returning to the absolute silence of the interrogation room. The massive scale of the global clearing machine collapses back down to the evidence on the metal table. We have traced the $54 trillion anomaly from your pocket to the exact coordinates of the systemic choke point. Facing the terrifying fragility of this architecture, we must render a final judgment on the entity known as Cede and Company. I pick up the smartphone, the screen still glowing with an artificially inflated portfolio balance, and turn it off. I place the dead glass down next to the ornate physical stock certificate from 1929. The camera pulls back, leaving these two artifacts in the cold fluorescent light. My role as the forensic auditor concludes here. We have analyzed the protocol, but the implications of this final report extend far beyond the perimeter of this room. This concerns you. Over the course of this investigation, we stripped away the user interface of modern capitalism. We went looking for a grand conspiracy, a deliberate heist executed by men in dark suits. But the evidence points to something much more profound. We found a system that choked on its own success. The sheer volume of trading in 1968 forced the architects of Wall Street to perform a desperate triage to prevent a complete logistical collapse of the United States economy. This brings us to the final, irrefutable verdict of our inquiry. The total centralization of your legal property rights was not an act of theft. It was a brutal, evolutionary necessity. The physical world, with its messengers and metal vaults, was simply too slow for the required velocity of modern capital. To scale the market to its current magnitude, the foundational concept of personal ownership had to be surgically excised from the financial system and replaced with a proxy. Cede and Company represents the ultimate bureaucratic compromise of the 20th century. The architects of this system deliberately traded the legal bedrock of absolute property rights for the frictionless narcotic of infinite liquidity. You cannot process transactions equating to 23 times the global gross domestic product if you are legally bound to verify and transfer tangible certificates. The ghosts of the ledger were conjured to keep the machine running at all costs. And for the most part, the compromise functions exactly as designed. As long as the servers hum flawlessly in those deep, air-gapped bunkers, and the continuous net settlement algorithms successfully balance the daily ledgers, the grand illusion holds perfectly. You tap a screen on your phone, a green notification appears instantly, and the machine dutifully honors your derivative claim. You feel like an owner, because the interface has been meticulously engineered to validate that feeling. We demand this instant gratification from our markets. We want the ability to liquidate our entire life savings in a fraction of a second from anywhere on the planet. But the law of equivalent exchange remains unbroken. That unprecedented speed required stripping your name from the corporate registry. It mathematically transformed you from a direct owner of capital into an unsecured, beneficial creditor of a Wall Street brokerage, separated from your wealth by layers of legal insulation. Because of this abstraction, we are forced to accept the systemic friction that comes with it. We must tolerate the mathematical anomalies, the phantom shares spawned by millions of fails to deliver that dilute the market in the shadows. We are forced to accept the brutal reality that during moments of extreme volatility, automated margin calls will lock us out of our own assets. The survival of the central clearinghouse is the supreme directive, overriding all retail trading rights. The vulnerability we uncovered is not just financial, it is existential. We centralized the entire American economic empire into a single, highly classified database. We replaced the decentralized resilience of tangible property with the fragile perfection of an interconnected digital ledger. If that master record is ever irrevocably corrupted by a coordinated state-sponsored attack or a quantum decryption event, the legal title to 83% of the market simply dissolves. We are standing on a foundation of pure data, trusting that the cryptography holds against the siege. The forensic reality remains entirely immutable. You are merely a tenant in a vast financial architecture built by, and legally belonging to, an obscure partnership operating from Lower Manhattan. You do not hold the deed to the house. You hold a digital receipt for the right to occupy a room, contingent upon the continued operation of a server you will never be allowed to see. This is the undeniable proof that closes our investigation. The system is not broken. It is functioning exactly according to its engineered parameters. Wall Street constructed a closed loop, a master ledger that dictates the flow of global wealth, and they hold the only key. We sacrificed our sovereignty for market efficiency, willingly surrendering the title deeds of the American economy to a shadow registry, just to ensure that the frantic pace of continuous trading never has to stop. If this final verdict has fundamentally altered how you perceive the digits in your own portfolio, document your conclusions in the comments below. The most dangerous weapon in a financial system built on abstraction is an educated participant who understands the underlying mechanics. Hit the like button to signal that this protocol was effective, and subscribe to the channel to continue our ongoing investigation into the hidden architecture of modern reality. The evidence awaits. In the digital age, the classical concept of absolute true ownership is definitively dead. There is no tangible vault securing your future, only a continuous stream of mathematical obligations routing through a centralized server. The illusion has completely replaced the reality. There is only the master ledger, and that ledger belongs entirely to them. The final report is submitted, and the file goes to the archives. Case closed.